So if a patient, for example, is actually describing their seizure, the look on their face, the emotion in their voice will tell not just me, I think most doctors who are dealing with epilepsy, is this a genuine epileptic seizure or is it likely to be a functional dissociative seizure? So I think, credit observation and kind of wanting to know everything about the patient, and in some way I feel patients also reciprocate this sense if a doctor really wants to know about them. If they get that vibe, they pour their heart out to you.
Yeah, I agree.
It's very often a resident comes to me with a patient and they tell me something and I feel something's amiss, and the moment I'll ask a patient, the patient will immediately spill the beans and the missing piece is there, and that's not because the resident wasn't trying to get a history, but probably they were getting it a little mechanically and just checking boxes.
Welcome to Epilepsy Sparks Insights. I'm your host, Tori Robinson, and today I am joined by Professor Mamta Singh, who's going to be sharing with us what high-volume epilepsy care really looks like in India, which has a population of almost 1.5 billion people. From seeing dozens of patients in a single day to the importance of communication, observation, and making people with an epilepsy feel genuinely heard. We're also going to talk about access to EEGs, MRIs, surgery pathways, and outreach epilepsy services across rural regions of India, alongside why listening carefully to people can sometimes be just as important as investigations themselves. If you're new here, please subscribe so that you don't miss future conversations. And let's get into today's episode. So, Mamta, tell us about what it's like in Delhi, in India, because you have high volume epilepsy services. You've told me about this. Now, often clinicians often worry that scale comes at the cost of quality. And from your experience and drawing on data from your own works, I know you have so many publications. What does excellent epilepsy care actually look like at scale?
The numbers in clinics, not just mine, but probably all my colleagues in India, we have very large volume clinics. And while we know that in epilepsy, the main thing that one remains focused at is, the seizure outcomes. All of us who work in epilepsy and who also have, have been researching epilepsy, we know that it's the non-seizure outcomes which actually contribute to the quality of life. So a patient can be seizure-free and yet all may not be well with them. So if it's a busy clinic, you do worry if you have missed things in a patient. And also, I think in India, a lot of patients are relatively reticent, especially about their mental health issues. They may not very openly complain that they were feeling anxious or have a low mood. So those are specific things that one has to look out for. In a busy clinic, you may not have the time to use a screening tool. But I think with experience, you do, just from the way the patient is carrying themselves and the way they're talking to you, you do get a sense of if things may not be all right. And then you can inquire and ascertain if, there may be something which the patient is harboring in addition to epilepsy. That's one thing. And then, you have these checklists, which are very handy tools for busy clinics. And we've kind of devised something for our own clinic. I have a student who's currently working on that to validate that checklist. So we do not want to miss, for example, drug-related side effects, sleep issues, sexual health. Sexual health is again something that Indian patients may not be very open about, especially as a woman. I know that my male patients may not really walk up to me and talk about something which may be really bothering them, but because of the reluctance to speak to a woman, about their sexual health. So I think just being a little more looking out for stuff, using a checklist, these may definitely improve quality in our in the care that we are providing, and hopefully, in spite of the volumes being quite large, we do hopefully manage to give our patients good care, which would be acceptable probably anywhere in the world.
Numbers wise, how many people may you see a day on average?
At the teaching hospital clinic that I work in New Delhi, I would see close to 12 to 15 new patients, and there would be about 40 to 50 or about 55, 60 follow-up patients.
Wow.
So, but then I do have a resident, neurology resident who are trainees who are learning neurology. One of them would be with me, and I generally have the resident go through the follow-up patients, and I look at the new patients myself because I want to get a sense of the new patients, up front before we make any mistakes, establish if they do have epilepsy, and what kind of epilepsy, and what plan, some kind of a treatment management plan for them up front. So I do the new patients entirely myself, but in the follow-up, because the resident is sitting just close by in the same room, so I do have 1 year over there trying to listen and pick up anything which requires my attention, and I can just hop in. But between us, we start clinics at around 8 in the morning, and generally try and finish by 4 to 5. Sometimes it gets a bit later. So it's a long clinic, and we're very used to doing that. But so we get it done.
That is full on. It's really good to get that insight that I think most people in high income countries have, or, in the West have no idea of this. For me personally, that's rather motivating.
Maybe, a lot of time has to be spent in the documentation. So we do maintain patient files in our clinic, because especially for chronic conditions, records are so important. So the next time the patient comes, one needs to know whatever was discussed in the previous visit, what were the issues which needed attention and which we have flagged for further, for any further action. So, but I think our record keeping still is not so obsessive. It's very much kind of need based. So I might note down that this patient, for example, is putting on weight, so that I remember to see, and I might help them make a plan as to how, what they can do going forward. And I need to remember that, because the next time when the patient comes, you can imagine, with so many patients, it's very easy to forget what was the issue for this particular patient. Or if somebody, for example, is planning a pregnancy, and, so the important things are going to be noted in the file, so that, and even if I don't happen to be there in a particular clinic for some reason, if those issues are flagged, so the documentation and the case notes, I think that's very important for busy clinics.
Clinician intuition, you have this in spades, but I think some people would be like, well, what does that even mean? That sounds quite vague, but I imagine it's kind of crucial given the number of people you see. But what is clinician intuition, and how can you pick up on things not just like seizures, as you've mentioned, people's mental health, if they want to have children, their weight, their physical health as a whole? How does your intuition work with that? And how does it work when you've got so little time?
Of course, one can't entirely rely only on intuition, but there's a lot of non-verbal communication. So, the way people walk into your clinic, looking confident or looking anxious, looking sad, for example. So it's not, I wouldn't entirely label it as intuition, but I would label it as good or keen observation. If a child, for example, or a young person is being brought in by, or is accompanied by a parent, you can in a moment, sense if there's any tension between the two, and the child or the younger patient is trying to tell you something that the parent is trying to, that it not be spoken about. So things like that. If a woman, for example, is accompanied by her husband or a mother-in-law or a father-in-law, And, you can make out if there are issues that, she is trying to resolve or at least inform you, but whether she's finding the freedom in the presence of this person. So some of it is intuition, but I think a lot of it is observation. And the way people talk to you, the way people describe what's happening to them. So if a patient, for example, is actually describing their seizure, the look on their face, the emotion in their voice will tell not just me, I think most doctors who are dealing with epilepsy, is this a genuine epileptic seizure or is it likely to be a functional dissociative seizure? So I think, credit observation and kind of wanting to know everything about the patient, and in some way I feel patients also reciprocate this sense if a doctor really wants to know about them. If they get that vibe, they pour their heart out to you.
Yeah, I agree.
It's very often a resident comes to me with a patient and they tell me something and I feel something's amiss. And the moment I'll ask a patient, the patient will immediately spill the beans and the missing piece is there, and that's not because the resident wasn't trying to get a history, but probably they were getting it a little mechanically and just checking boxes rather than really, so the patients are also very, very intuitive in that way. And they know and they kind of feel that, well, this person wants to help me. And I need to tell them all the time.
Tell us about your access to EEGs and MRIs and basically data that is going to help you make these decisions. What is your access to stuff like that like?
At AIMS in New Delhi, where I am working, I have excellent access. I can ask for a CT scan sitting in my clinic and maybe in a couple of hours I'll have it. And if an EEG is urgent, I can get it done in over the next hour and I can just go walk down to the lab and have a look at the EEG. So I have no complaints about not having access to any kind of investigations here in New Delhi. But it's very different when I go for my outreach clinics. So there it's almost like a dream for a patient to get any kind of a CT scan or an MRI or an EEG. It's not easy. It would entail traveling a long distance, spending money that they might not have. So they're very different scenarios if you ask me, because I work in Delhi most of the time, but I also travel and work in these outreach clinics very often. And I've been doing that for long enough. So I'm very comfortable, at either place. I sometimes in outreach clinics, I do, in an occasional patient who's just had one seizure, maybe the first time in their lives, 3 days back. And I do want to look at the scan because I am worried, what could it be? What could it be caused by? But that's not a very frequent occurrence. In outreach clinics, most patients generally have had epilepsy for long enough for you to know that, well, it's not a glioma or it's not, something that sinister. But just because it's been there for 20 years, no glioma would be sitting there for 20 years. So,
right.
So you don't really, I don't really kind of feel shorthanded that I don't have, an investigation at my beck and call all the time when I'm doing my outreach clinics. Very comfortable with managing most patients, even, with clinical information that I can get from the history.
And what about people who have, for instance, a rare epilepsy, or people who are having multiple seizures a day, or have, other sort of symptoms of, say, a genetic abnormality? How do you help people in those cases?
So those are not patients that one can manage in outreach clinics, Those patients require a multidisciplinary approach. They require extensive tests, including genetics. They require very refined, tailored images sometimes. They require video EEG records, extended video EEG studies where we want to record seizures to see what exactly the seizures look like. Sometimes these are surgical candidates and all kinds of other investigations are required. So, in my hospital over here, it's all available and it can be managed. But if I see a patient of this kind in a village somewhere, then I have to, try and ensure that they are able to make it to New Delhi, to my hospital, so that they are able to get the care. Because it's not possible to really manage these patients in outreach clinics in the community. where, with very limited resources that are available over there.
And how is that funded? Because the people have to come into your clinic, right? It's not I suppose they do have the choice, but as far as quality of life and potentially just life itself, they have to come in.
So most of the time, the least that the patient has to do or is expected to do is make the journey. So unless, sometimes when I'm working with local government health machineries, sometimes they've found assistance, at least they provide travel assistance to these patients. And once they reach our hospital in New Delhi, it's almost no cost kind of care that is available. We have a kind of government provided insurance for people of a certain, like economic status. And if they have that, well, then just everything is free for them, even admissions, surgeries, all investigations, whatever. So a lot of patients from my outreach clinics over the years have managed to come to New Delhi and even get surgery and get treatment, complicated, difficult treatments, investigations, everything. Travel by train isn't that exorbitant. A lot of people can even afford it. If they find assistance for it, of course, it's great. Sometimes I have funding and I'm also able to help them with travel, as in when, I have funding for such patients. So all in all, it does work out for most people who need to come.
If you have one or even two recommendations for people who in countries such as yourself, but also those in higher income countries, say those in Europe or, North America or Australasia, what would your tips be?
Even if doctors who manage epilepsy, even if they do have a very easy access to investigations, even then I feel epilepsy patients are going to be served far more if we can sit with them patiently and listen to them. I think you cannot overvalue the time and attention that you can give to your patient. No MRI, no PET scan, no EEG can really replace that. So it doesn't matter where in the world you are. I think a patient would be far more grateful to you, if you have had the time and the inclination to sit while you're not distracted on your mobile phone, while you're not staring at a screen, but you're looking at the patient, listening to them, and letting them speak. That's what I think, strongly believe in.
I agree. As somebody who's experienced both great clinician and what I would consider not so great, listening and understanding enables you to be a better clinician when it comes to helping that person, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So most of the time you do have the patient tell you their diagnosis, if you're willing to listen. And then, of course, later on the patient is thanking you, but you know that the patient has told you what they had because you could not have known what you know simply because the patient has told you so. And it doesn't matter what kind of a patient it was, whether they were literate or not, whether they were rich or poor or where they were coming from. Sometimes I may not even understand the language that they are speaking, but yet I feel that communication and that trying to understand and just wanting to know what exactly is happening to you, I think it is the most invaluable thing that a clinician has. And I think everybody should use that as much as they can.
Massive thanks to Mamta for joining us and sharing such valuable insights into epilepsy care in India. Our chat highlighted something that can easily be overlooked in modern medicine, and that even in very busy clinics, careful listening, observation, and communication remain some of the most important tools a clinician has. It was also fascinating to hear more about the scale of epilepsy services available across India, including access to EEGs, MRIs, surgery pathways, and specialist multidisciplinary care for many people who may otherwise be assumed to have little or no access to treatment. If you enjoyed our conversation, please share it with a friend or a colleague and hit follow and subscribe so that you do not miss future episodes. And see you next time.